Hey guys, Chris Harrison here. I'm going to explain to you the parameters for the next research project. If I sound a little out of it, you'll have to excuse me. I'm still recovering from the flu, so I'm a little low on energy and my voice is still a little spent from all the coughing. So just bear with me and we'll explain how to get this done. Now, a full written typed explanation for all the research projects, all the elements of the research project can be found here on the web page in the Research Projects tab. I'm going to click on it and show you what we're talking about. These are just some basic source guidelines, just a little hint there for things for you to look at. But the assignment I'm looking at right here, this is the research assignment 1. This is what you should be working on right now. This is what I'm going to talk about right now. This is going to be due next Thursday. And again, what you're doing here is basically getting started on your research for the research essay, for the research paper. We are continuing work on the exact same story that you wrote your first essay on. So in other words, the response that you've turned in, the essay that you've turned in, and now all of this research should all still be working. It should all be related to the same story. So it's either going to be I think some of you are doing James Joyce, some of you are doing Flannery O'Connor, some are doing Cheever, others are doing Faulkner, and so on. Basically, you're going to turn in a single works-cited page. In other words, a list of resources, MLA format, just like you learned in 101. I'll provide some links. There's to your book, or excuse me, there's some pages in your book that explain that. I'll provide those later. Maybe post those up in an announcement for you, so you have a handy reference there for how to format that page. Basically, this is going to be a list of about 10 sources. For 5 of them, I want to make sure that you've already read them. So underneath those sources, underneath those entries in the works cited page, I want you to include a 3 to 4 sentence little summary of the article. And as you see, I've broken it down into 2 books. Excuse me, 2 books, 4 journal articles from AVL, 2 magazine or newspaper articles, and 2 web pages. And let me explain a little bit why I want these different sources. The 2 books, basically, books are going to contain older information. So each type of these sources, by the way, I should mention, gives you a sort of different perspective on the work. So books are going to have older, more fundamental information. They're usually books about your author, so they'll have multiple chapters about multiple aspects of that author's work. Maybe one of those chapters refers to your story, but you should still be looking for a book that is about your author, not by your author, but about your author. It does, every now and then there are collections of your author's works that contain a good academic introduction written by a scholar. That's not a bad idea either, but for our purposes, I want you to get books that are about your author that contain multiple individual essays about varying works of your author. One of those, again, of course, should be about the story that you're writing or writing about. Now, journal articles, these are professional level periodicals. These are written by experts for experts. These are often called peer-reviewed journals. And basically, you consider those come out periodically from month to month, season to season, year to year, and those are going to be the leading edge of research. Literary research doesn't necessarily replace research that comes before it. It's not like science or medicine or something where something that we do not now would completely replace something that we did 10 years ago. We wouldn't go back to that old way of looking at it. Literature's not like that. Generally, our literary research tends to shift culturally as we move on. So we get new perspectives, but they don't necessarily overrule older perspectives. So these literary research articles are going to be, again, as I mentioned, for scholars, by scholars, written by folks with PhD after their name, who have nice paneled offices in 4-year universities, teaching lecture classes a couple of times a semester. And these are going to be where, honestly, where you'll probably get the bulk of your information, and I'm going to show you where to find those as well. Also, I want you to look for a couple of regular old magazine and newspaper articles. You can find these online, or you can find these in print in the library if you choose. Magazine and newspaper articles obviously are written for regular folks, just the average reader, the average person. So these are going to have a slightly different perspective on your story. They're not going to be as deeply academic, but they may talk about your reader, or excuse me, your work or your author as sort of as a cultural thing. In other words, James Joyce is famous in England. He's a well-respected author. He's a cultural historical artifact, for lack of a better phrase. The same thing with Flannery O'Connor. She is a Southern treasure. Her magazine, excuse me, not her magazine, but personally, I've visited her home in Savannah, Georgia. It's a museum. So, these things are usually, you might not be an art scholar, but you understand why Leonardo da Vinci is important. These magazines and newspaper articles are going to give us the same kind of information about our writers. Now, the final two things I want you to look for are two web pages about your work or about your author or about literature related to your work in general. I want you to be very careful about the web pages that you get. Again, I don't want aggregate or encyclopedic or study web pages. For example, Spark Notes and Wikipedia and Cliff's Notes and Ask.com and those sorts of things. It should be a web page dedicated to literature, or most specifically to your author. That's probably going to be your best bet, actually. Searching for yourauthor'sname.org. Chances are there's a museum somewhere or an academic society somewhere that is dedicated to the promotion of your author and their works. Those are going to have a lot of great information. If you go to this web page and you can look up a recipe for cheese dip, and you can look up a page on your author, you're in the wrong place. That is not an academic place to look for. There is also a few pages on in the library's webpage that help you vet web pages. There are basically about three checklist points that you really want to make sure that you can find to validate a web page. First of all, if it has an article on it, that article should have sources of its own. It should be a researched article. Secondly, it should have an author who claims it. In other words, and that author should probably be an expert with credentials. They should be a PhD or a professor or an instructor or a teacher somewhere or a scholar. They should have books to their credit and other articles to their credit. And lastly, it should tell you when it was updated or when it was published. If you can't find those three things, you need to keep looking. And again, as a last point, you're going to turn all of this in as a single MLA formatted works cited page. The instructions for works cited pages are in your handbook under the MLA section. There's also a section in the appendices in the back of your textbook that will help you format your MLA web page if you've never done, or not your web page, excuse me, your works cited page if you haven't done that. Although you should have done that in one-on-one. Also, I want half of those articles, that is 5 of them, to contain a short 3 to 4 sentence description below its entry. So you'll have your list of entries in alphabetical order as usual, and underneath 5 of them before the next one, just a little short paragraph. And you'll submit this entire thing as an attached Word file. You'll click on this link right here and turn it in like that. So without further ado, let's jump into the library webpage and see what it looks like. If you've used it this semester, or if you haven't used it this semester, you'll notice that it looks completely different than it did before. So there's some new things that we need to look for, and searching won't be exactly the same way as it used to be. By the way, as I mentioned before, all of these have slightly different types of information in them, and that's what this source guide is about. It talks a little more in depth about that sort of thing, what to avoid, what to look for. So anyway, without further ado, let's get into the library webpage. If you notice here, I'm on the Gadsden State homepage. If your computer does not show this piece right here, this bit of information, then you need to install Flash on your device, or if you are on an Apple device, you need to download an app called Puffin that allows you to view Flash. If you can't view Flash, you can't use the library webpage. So make sure that that's there and that you can use it. So let's scroll down, click to the library page, and this will pop up here in just a moment. Now, The library webpage asks you to log in. This is really good because it can save your searches. You can save your the articles that you found. You can save them permanently, save links to them. I'm not going to bother logging in at the moment, but in the library they really suggest that you do this because it allows a bit of permanence. So for example, if you're searching for something and you've got to hurry up and get to class, but you don't have the time to print it out or to save it otherwise, you can just click a few buttons and come back to it later, and what you've looked for will still be there. But this, your username is going to be the number on the back of your Gadsden State ID underneath the barcode. That's not the same as your G number, so keep that in mind. Your initial password is userpass, and once you use that, it'll ask you to update your password to something that you personally can remember. Once you do that, it's yours. The library has no access to it, so make sure that you can remember it. Now let's get started and look for a few books, okay? Say for example I am looking for James Joyce. Now I don't want to look for my title. I don't want to look for Araby as I'm looking for books because I've already got a copy of Araby. It's in my textbook. So I'm going to look for James Joyce. Whoops, spelled it wrong. I'm just going to type it into the search box here and hit the word search. And in just a minute, a series of books should pop up. And here they are, a James Joyce miscellany. James Joyce, here's a book on James Joyce. There's a few others here. There's actually lots of them, actually. 2 Decades of Criticism, that would be a very good one. The Authorized Reader, and so forth. You don't necessarily need a reader of James Joyce. When it says a reader, a lot of times that means that it's a collection of his works. You're looking for stuff that has works about him. As you'll note, obviously all of these works, just like any library, if it's found on the shelves, you'll have a call number. The neat thing about our library, as opposed to, say, your high school library or even the public library, they don't use the Dewey Decimal here. They use the Library of Congress designation, which means all the James Joyce entries are going to be in the same section, PR 6019.09. Notice I scroll down here. I see the same number, PR 6019.09, and so forth. That means that you basically just have to look up this section, go to it in the physical shelves of the library, and you will see a series of shelves that contain all the James Joyce material. Books by James Joyce, books about James Joyce, they are all there. What I usually do at this point, and yes, this is tedious, yes, it takes time, but that's why we call it research and not just searching, is I start to go up there and I will pull books off the shelf, either randomly or one after another, and I will scan the table of contents looking for a chapter that matters to me, or I'll look in the back of the book and look through the indices and see if there are key words or key ideas or the title of my book, or excuse me, the title of my short story, looking for thoughts or concepts or ideas or bits of information that are relevant to what I'm looking for. It is a manual process. It does take a little time, but it's not doesn't take as long as you think. It might, it takes you 30 seconds to scan a table of contents and indices. If there's nothing on it, put it back, grab the next book, and do it again. Find a few or a couple, and go check them out. That's all you got to do. By the way, you shouldn't do this just once. Once you find more about your author, once you start finding key terms that show up in your research, for example, knowing that James Joyce is a famous modernist writer, or modernism, you might go back and start refining your search, looking for James Joyce and modernism and things like that. In other words, adding words to your search so that you can find more specific information. And that's how we would use a physical textbook. Now, if you'll notice, not all these books are text. For example, here's an ebook. Ebooks are great. You can thumb through them here online. You don't even have to check them out. So, for example, oh, by the way, on the hardline books, it's also worth noting here that, like this one, for example, is at Wallace Drive campus. Now, say you're in Oxford or you're in Cherokee County. You can click the Reserve This Title book, and, the Reserve This Title link, excuse me, and have this book delivered to the library closest to you, as long as it's one of our campuses. We also have access to books that are in other campus libraries all across the state. So if we have a book that you need, or if it's listed here but it's not in our campus, all you've got to do is click reserve this title. It usually takes a couple of days, but it can be delivered directly to your nearest pickup point. So click that link and it'll give you it'll ask you where you want it, where you want to pick it up. So anyway, let's take a look at an ebook, for example. Ebooks are just like what they sound like. They're textbooks that are right here online. Excuse me. And the computer's going to move a little bit slow this morning. But when we go through ebooks, ebooks are great. As I mentioned before, if some of you guys are wanting the same book, you can all look at an ebook. You don't even have to necessarily check out an ebook. You can just kind of scan through it right here. So let's take a look here. I'm going to click on, and by the way, notice these subjects down here. These are elements of this book that are highly sought after. So notice I mentioned modernism for James Joyce, psychology, egoism, hospitality, self, and so forth. These are other search terms that may show up over your reading. So let's go here, click where to find it, and I'm going to click here on Bibliographic Record Display. And what this should do is give me the link directly to the book. And I can click over here on ebook full text, and here's my book. Now, like I said before, if you've got the physical book, if you're in the shelf, you will pull it out, take a look at your table of contents, or go through the indices and see if you find what you need. I can do the same thing here. I can click the search button and search for a particular term if I want to, and it'll find it in the book for me, and I can click directly to that page. Or I can look over here, scan through the table of contents, and see what I want to find. So let's look and see if Araby's in here, for example. No results. This book doesn't have Araby in it, so we can leave it alone. We don't need it, so we can go on to another one. But suppose it did. Let's do this real quick and do modernism, and just take a look, just, randomly at a particular page. Obviously, I don't necessarily need this whole book. I don't necessarily need the physical copy of it, but I may want to borrow this particular chapter. Once this one finally pulls up, eventually, let's give it a moment here. What you're going to see is basically what looks like a photocopy of the book. We saw the cover a moment ago to see what it looks like. And once this pulls up, and I apologize for the slowness of it, let's look at a different version. Let's try this and see if, there we go. This one, it will give me the option, should I choose to do so. Obviously, I don't need the whole book. I can email this section to myself. I can print this section if I want to. Notice I can say current page in the next however many pages, and print the PDF of the book. Or like I said, I can email it to myself. You might be able to copy and paste into a Word document if you wanted to, although that might be a little tedious at this point. Or, as I mentioned before, I can save a permanent link to it if I've logged in, and there's actually a page in your account that allows you to save these permalinks that you can come back to later if you want to. But again, for my purposes, I would personally recommend printing these out. As a matter of fact, I'm going to recommend that you print out all of these electronic sources. You do not want to do all of this reading, all of this research, staring at your computer screen. That will make this an amazingly tedious process. You want a hard copy. You want a piece of paper that you can take with you, that you can go sit on the couch with, that you can go sit on the back porch with, that you can take to the coffee shop, or sit out in a chair between classes and read. You do not want to have to stare at your computer for this entire process. Print it out. That way you can underline, you can highlight, you can make notes on it, you can organize pieces of information. Later on, I'll give you another tutorial that'll show you how to condense all your print and everything into one little packet. But basically, make sure that you pull out what you need, save it for posterity, make sure that you keep all of your citation information with it. It usually does that when you print. Let's see what it says here. Oh, no, it's not going to do it right here. But in either way, if you are going to print a section of this book, make sure that you go back. Actually, I think this gives us a citation section. Where is it? Right here. You can click this cite button and it will give you the MLA citation. So you'll want to put that down somewhere. Make sure that you save it for posterity, and then when you print this, make sure that it stays connected to it so you know where this piece of information came from. So that's basically how you would look up a book, and that's just our simplest, easy source, the go-to source, the fundamental source for a library. So let's see here. Now, let's go back and look for a few articles, shall we? Go back to our results. I'm going to start over again, and I'm going to use a different search term this time. Now, as I mentioned before, journal articles are periodicals. Now, keep in mind, AVL is on the internet. That is true. But these are not internet sources. AVL is like a library within the internet. It is not the internet at large. When you look up stuff on AVL, these are print sources archived online in a secure location. Again, it is the internet equivalent of a library. It is not the big world. These are, again, for scholars by scholars. So let's use William Faulkner this time. Now, when I search for books, I'm going to use my author because I'm not going to find a whole book that's just about my work. Now, that's not true about AVL articles. With AVL articles, we actually can find articles that are specifically about our work. So I'm not going to look up, well, I may look up barn burning here. Let's try barn burning as an example. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to narrow my search. I want you to hit the choose resources button. By the way, when I click this button, here's where you see your evaluating internet sources and evaluating web pages. Take a look at that when you start looking for those web pages. I can scroll down here and you'll see an entry for English. I click it and it's going to search the databases or the rough equivalent of online libraries that are relevant to English. So there's that. And let's click search. And as you'll see over here, I got a results summary. English is down here. Wow, look at that sucker populate. Up to 5,700 already. There you're going to find a whole lot of articles about your work. Okay, so we've got 5,900 entries on barn burning. That's a lot. That's way more than you need, obviously. And if you'll see here, each one of these is an individual library. I would recommend EBSCO Search Premier is a good one. EBSCO Newspaper Source is a good one. That's where you can find your periodicals, by the way. Also, Gale Literary Resources is very, very good. These, just use your common sense here. Some of these are obviously dedicated exclusively to research, literary research. EBSCO Academic is a little bit broader. It's going to have a few periodicals, but those are probably my two favorite. But obviously, at any rate, 3,500 is way too many. 30 is not so bad. I could go into Literature Resources of Gale, and I can click through, and I can see these and use them if I want. But I want to go back up here real quick just to show you a few things. To go and look at EBSCO Academic. Obviously, 3,500 is way too much for me to look for, so I'm going to modify my qualifier. I'm going to limit it to full text articles so that I won't just get references to where an article should be. And I'm going to limit to peer-reviewed articles. Again, that is what we've talked about, these journal articles. They're formed by experts. I click search again, and we'll see that instead of 3,800 or something, I'm down to 1,300, And that obviously narrows my search quite a bit. Now, there are other things that I can do too if I want. I can modify my search. anytime you're searching, like if you search Google, for example, if you search car, you're going to get every car. If you search red car, you're going to get red cars. If you search for red American car, obviously it narrows your search even further. The same thing is true for when we're searching for literary sources. If I search for barn burning, I'm going to get everything that's said about barn burning. Now, if I want to add another search term, I can obviously limit my source. Now, this may be something that you have to come back and do later, because you have to do a little research to understand what terms it is that you might want to use to limit your research. So, for example, I'm just going to give you a quick hint. Barn burning and Old Testament. Faulkner loved his Bible. Sorry about that, guys. And as you'll see, I narrow it down quite a bit, down to 189. And now I can just kind of skim through these and look for ones that I want. I'm not going to spend too much time showing you how to search. I'm just going to show you how to look for these things. Hang on a second. Let's go back and delete this just for a second. Go back to our original. And then I want to go back down to Gale, just because I like it. Father and Sons. Narrative legerdemain. I don't even know what that means. Never heard of it, even as a literary teacher. Faulkner's Barn Burning. Let's see. There's probably a few others. Obviously, some of these don't work quite too well. And you know, you get a few outliers as you're searching through there. Actually, it didn't go to Gale. There it is. Teaching the conflicts as a temporary instructor. I don't know what these are, actually. Some of these don't really fit. But let's just follow one of these links to see what these journal articles look like. Since I've limited it to full text, once this comes up, and it should here in a moment, we're waiting for it. There we go. We should get the full text article. Down at the end of the article, we should see that, as I mentioned, it does have a list of sources of its own. And you also see the source citation. Now, if you do borrow these source citations as they're provided in the article, or as we saw earlier when you click the citation button, you obviously still need to put these in alphabetical order in your Works Cited page. You will also need to format the spacing and the font, because this is obviously not Times New Roman 12. And once you cut and paste it into your Word document, it may not be perfectly double spaced either. So keep in mind the normal rules of MLA format still apply. Double spaced, alphabetical order, Times New Roman 12 font. So make sure that you do your formatting if you choose to cut and paste these things. Now, here's what I do when I'm doing my sources like this. At this point, if I want, I can print this as is. I can email it to myself. I can download it and save it. I can do whatever I want to at this point. But what I personally like to do is open myself up a Word document. And, you know, it's a little low tech, but I just cut and paste the whole sucker. I cut and paste the whole sucker into my Word document. And I'll do a few things just to simplify it, to make sure that I'm not wasting too much paper. I'll single space it and make it a little smaller. And notice what I do here is I'll just save this one, go back to my results. Let's scoop down and take a look at this one. This one will come up. And I'm going to do the same thing. You know, I may skim it a little bit just to make sure I want it. But again, cut and paste the whole thing. Again, all my citation information stays with it. I make sure that I keep that. Print it up. And so I'll do this with however many articles I end up needing. And instead of having 6, 7, 8 different files that I have to carry around with me and print separately, I save this whole thing as this is going to be my Faulkner Research Documents 1, right? And now if I come back later and I save another grip of them, I'll call it Faulkner Research Documents 2, so that I know that sort of thing. And now I have this one singular little research packet that I can print up, staple together, double hole punch or triple hole punch if I want to, put it in a folder. I can build my own little research packet, carry my own little study handbook on my research handbook on my author. That way I don't have, file after file after file to take care of. And that's just the way I do it. I actually keep these over time as a researcher so that I can go back to them later. If you're an English major, you may do this. Hang on to this research, come back and look at it again later. It may be helpful to you in another class as you go along. And so here I've got a 24-page packet. Obviously, this may end up being 40, 50, 60 pages. And later on, I'll also have this here so that I can cut and paste things into my own document and cite them and source them and quote them and so forth if I choose to. But anyway, that's how I pull out and compile all my research. Matter of fact, though, let's go back and take a look at those newspaper articles. EBSCO newspaper source. Let's see. Now, notice with the newspaper, we're getting a whole bunch of stuff just about barn fires. So with a newspaper source, we might actually have to go back and look for William Faulkner. Let's choose our resources. Let's go back. Where is it? Newspaper resource. There we go. And search. Okay, and I'm going to click on the newspaper source button. And notice, Tulsa World, here's another one, Northeast Mississippi Daily Journal. Faulkner was from Mississippi, so you're going to see a lot of stuff from Mississippi regarding who Faulkner is. New York Times Magazine, Philadelphia Inquirer, and so on. And again, I can do the same thing that I did with these others. I can cut and paste these into my master document and save them and come back to them later and print them as a whole. Well, that is the basics of digging around through our library webpage. I hope that helps you figure out how to find what you're looking for. I did not speak about web pages. As I mentioned before, this is something that you're going to do on Google or with Bing. And again, I highly recommend that you come in here, take a look at one of these evaluating internet resources web pages to help you figure out what a good web page looks like. Again, my basic rule would be make sure it has sources of its own, make sure that it has a credentialed author who takes credit for the work, and lastly, make sure that it tells you when it was last updated. Those are the basics of completing this assignment. Again, you're going to do the whole thing and turn it all in as one singular works cited document. A few notes on that. You are not married to this research right now. What shows up in this works cited page may not be what shows up in your final research paper. That is okay. This is what we call a tentative works cited. I want you getting started on your research, not necessarily finishing it right now. Remember, research is augmenting and replacing to a degree your old brainstorming process. So you are starting already with some ideas in mind. You will find ideas that either elaborate on that, maybe dispute that, or maybe just orient you all together. Keeping those things together, excuse me, let me back up a hair. You may read through some of it and find out you don't need it at a later date. That's absolutely okay. It's just like brainstorming. You come up with more ideas than you necessarily need to end with. But also, keep in mind that I have you reading these variety of sources because I want you to get a broad look at your author. You need to know more than you need for the paper to write the paper. In other words, you need, well, it's just like cooking. You'd rather have more ingredients than you need than not enough. And if you have just enough, it really limits you. But looking through these books, looking through these journal articles, looking through these magazine and newspapers, and then looking through the web pages about your working author should give you a very, very well-rounded look at your author. I also suggest that you share some of your research in the discussion boards. And if you find a good author, share it with some of your fellow group members and talk about your ideas back and forth trade ideas. Say, has anybody read this? Does anybody know about that? Can anybody elaborate on this? What do you think of this? And again, share your knowledge, share your understanding, and share your discoveries with each other. That's what makes research all the more fun. Not keeping it all to yourself, but being able to discuss it with people at a level that allows you to understand far more than what you just read on the simple page. So I hope that fixes everything for you. If you have any questions, make sure that you email me, or again, do not forget to ask your librarian for help. They run the library. I use them as much as you will if I go in there. So use them. They are the experts. I can help you put this stuff together once you find it, but they are the experts on finding it. As a matter of fact, I've borrowed this directly from our librarian about how to use all of this. So I hope that helps you out. Good luck. Get in touch if you have any trouble. Have a good one.